It was supposed to be a quiet morning at a small-town diner, a place where regulars exchanged greetings over coffee and pancakes. But everything changed when an elderly black woman walked in, her warm smile met with cold, piercing stares. Two uniformed cops sat near the counter, their whispered comments quickly turning into loud, humiliating remarks. The room grew tense as their words cut through the air, their authority used as a shield for their prejudice. The woman, dignified yet visibly shaken, tried to ignore them. But then she pulled out her phone. What happened next left everyone in the diner stunned. The officer's smug attitudes shifted as her quiet call began to reveal something they didn't expect, something that would turn the entire situation on its head. Who was this woman, and what truth was about to come to light? You're not going to want to miss what happens next. As the elderly woman calmly spoke into her phone, the diner seemed to hold its breath. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, their smirks fading as the tone of her conversation became clear. She wasn't just calling a friend or a family member. Her words carried a quiet authority, and the few phrases the diners overheard hinted at something much bigger. The waitress behind the counter, who had been pretending not to notice the scene, began to fidget nervously. Regulars whispered to each other, wondering who this woman could be. Despite her small stature and unassuming presence, there was something commanding about the way she carried herself. It wasn't long before the officers began to shift in their seats, their confidence visibly cracking. Who was on the other end of the line, and why were these officers, who had been so bold just moments ago, suddenly looking so unsure? The tension in the room only grew thicker. The diner was caught in an uneasy silence, with every eye locked on the woman. The officers tried to maintain their composure, leaning back in their chairs as if to downplay the situation, but their confidence had clearly wavered. One of them, the taller of the two, cleared his throat loudly, as if to reassert control. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" he asked, his tone sharper than it needed to be. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she calmly ended her call, placed her phone on the table, and looked directly at him. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, and for the first time, the officer seemed to hesitate. The younger cop leaned in toward his partner, whispering something hurriedly, his face now pale. Meanwhile, the other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some were unsure whether to speak up or stay silent. The waitress bit her lip, as if torn between fear and curiosity. And then the woman spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You're about to find out," she said. The officers froze, their expressions now a mix of confusion and unease, as if they knew something was coming but couldn't stop it. The diner felt like it was on the verge of exploding from the tension. The officers, who had started out so loud and sure of themselves, now looked like they were running out of excuses. The taller one shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his bravado slipping as he muttered, "Let's not make this into something it doesn't need to be." But his words didn't carry the weight they had earlier. The woman didn't flinch. Her steady gaze seemed to see right through him, and it was clear she wasn't backing down. Outside, the faint sound of sirens began to grow louder. The officers exchanged panicked glances, their earlier confidence unraveling by the second. "What did you do?" the younger cop asked, his voice cracking just enough to betray his nerves. The woman tilted her head slightly, her calm expression almost challenging them to find out. Inside the diner, the tension was palpable. Some of the customers sat frozen, while others glanced out the window, trying to figure out what was happening. The waitress stepped back, almost knocking over a tray, her eyes darting between the woman and the officers. When the sirens stopped just outside, the door of the diner swung open. All eyes turned toward the entrance, waiting to see who had arrived, and what truth was about to be exposed. The diner door swung open with a sharp jingle of the bell, and in walked two sharply dressed individuals. One a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, the other a woman in a blazer carrying a folder. They moved with purpose, their expressions calm but serious, as if they already knew what they were walking into. The officers straightened in their seats, their earlier smugness replaced by visible discomfort. The taller one stammered, "This isn't necessary." We were just. But the man in the suit held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The suited man turned to the elderly woman and greeted her with a polite nod. "Miss Davis, I apologize for the delay. Are you all right?" The officer's faces drained of color at the mention of her name. Whispers rippled through the diner as some customers began piecing together the puzzle. "Miss Davis, why did that name sound familiar?" The younger cop leaned toward his partner again, whispering frantically. The older officer shook his head, clearly rattled. "We didn't know," he muttered under his breath, though it was too late to backtrack. The woman in the blazer stepped forward, opening her folder and laying a set of documents on the nearest table. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, addressing the officers, "I think you know exactly who you've been harassing. And if you don't, these will make it crystal clear." The tension in the room spiked as the two cops stared down at the papers, their jaws tightening. Whatever they saw there, it wasn't good, and it was about to change everything. The officers stared at the documents in stunned silence, their confidence now completely shattered. The woman in the blazer spoke again, her voice steady but firm. "Miss Davis is a retired federal judge, and these papers outline her decades of service, including cases where she fought to hold law enforcement accountable. I'd suggest you take a moment to reflect on how you've chosen to treat her today." The taller officer opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The younger one simply slumped back in his chair, as if the weight of their actions had finally hit him. The man in the suit stepped forward, his tone firm. "What you did today wasn't just disrespectful, it was a violation of your duty. Miss Davis doesn't just deserve your respect, she's earned it more times than you can count." As murmurs spread through the diner, Miss Davis calmly rose from her seat. "I didn't call anyone to punish you," she said, her voice soft but powerful. "I called because people like you need to be reminded who you're supposed to protect. This was never about me. It's about every person who doesn't have the platform I do." Just as it seemed the moment was wrapping up, a man sitting quietly in the corner of the diner stood up and approached the officers. "You might want to be careful who you're rude to next time," he said, pulling out his phone. "I've been recording this whole thing." The officers' faces paled even further as they realized their actions were now documented for the world to see. With that, Miss Davis walked out of the diner, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence, and two officers who would never forget the lesson they had just been taught. As Miss Davis disappeared through the diner's door, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. The officers sat frozen, their usual authority stripped away by their own actions and the truth they could no longer escape. Customers quietly resumed their meals, but the atmosphere had changed. There was a sense that everyone had witnessed something important. The man who had filmed the encounter gave the officers one last pointed look before leaving the diner himself. Outside, Miss Davis was already walking down the sidewalk, her head held high. She didn't need to look back. She had made her point. Her calm strength had spoken louder than any argument could have. Back inside, the waitress cleared the table Miss Davis had sat at, a small smile on her face. Justice had come in the most unexpected way, leaving everyone with a reminder: respect is earned, but dignity should never be denied.